NFC North 24-25 NFL playoffs. Minnesota, Green Bay, and Detroit, the heavy favorite to get to the Super Bowl, go down in defeat in their opening games. Hey everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition, this side of 25 now, to Park Ridge Sports History. We had a show on Rickey Henderson to start the new year, and now I'd like to delve into about three different items as we are making way for tonight's championship game on Inauguration Day of Donald J. Trump. The championship game in the NCAA football Division I, matching the Notre Dame Fighting Irish against the Ohio State Buckeyes. And point blank, I'm rooting for Notre Dame. I've been, if you've watched the show, Park Ridge Sports History, you know that I have been a Notre Dame fan since the time I was a youngster, following Notre Dame both on the radio and then on Sunday mornings when they used to have a recap or a taped show with Lindsey Nelson. Did a 30-minute recap of the previous day's game. Let's say I remember Notre Dame LSU being one of the games, then Notre Dame, let's say Purdue. So it was always something to look forward to on Sunday morning, because at that time, you got to remember that the NCAA didn't allow the teams to be, actually they limited the number of times teams could be aired. So Notre Dame, once they finally got their own station with NBC, now you can watch all the games, and now they have streamed them onto NBC Peacock, and you can get them on the computer and all the rest of it. It's just the technology and the avenues where you can watch NCAA football are just so open, so abundant for the college football fanatic like myself. So anyway, Notre Dame, and I am worried about tonight's game, as any Notre Dame Fighting Irish fan would be. We've been saying our rosaries all day, hoping to match the Ohio State Buckeyes, play per play, yard for yard, and of course point per point. And I'm not bothering giving any keys to the game. As I said last week, here's the biggest key in the game: outscore the other team. Here's the second key: don't let them score as many points as you. I don't think it can be simplified more than that. But if there are a couple of elements maybe to watch, and that is actually Notre Dame's running game. I know it's been talked about all year as being, an unbelievable ground attack. However, I was looking at, I'm just going to look, Jeremiah Love, for instance. I was just doing a quick total of some of his yardage in the game. Has had a great year. And I'll say this: if Notre Dame goes on and wins the national championship, making Marcus Freeman, how appropriate would this be on Martin Luther King Day, the first African-American to win a college football Division I championship? That would be just remarkable. It would just be unbelievable. And it would really wake up the echoes of college football. But anyway, I was looking at some of the stats. And now, mind you, I was just doing a light dumpster dive, because when I talk about Bob Uecker today, I'm going to really go into a dumpster dive with him and his actual 146 lifetime hits. Anyway, I have not been, listen, I'm a Notre Dame fan, so immediately we're always going to be a cynic about our team. And I know they're known for their ground attack with Riley Leonard, the transfer from Duke, and of course, Jeremiah Love, the lead running back for their team. And as I stated, if they go on to win this championship, that run and that second, third, indeed fourth effort touchdown against Penn State, in really a brilliantly played game by both teams, it's an all-time game. Maybe not in terms of artistry, but in terms of just pure drama. That Notre Dame Penn State game was just unbelievable, coming down to the wire, to a 3-point, to a field goal to win it basically as the clock, as the gun went off to signal the end of the game. It was just a great game, back and forth, back and forth. And it was really the first time this year watching Notre Dame, I had butterflies in my stomach because I just couldn't take the drama. Anyway, in that game, Love scored that big touchdown, and it was a grind. He just bullied, and just churned out the necessary yards to score, stretching his arms, putting the ball over the goal line to give Notre Dame the lead. And it's iconic. Just that whole thing, it just goes back to, I'm telling you, if they win this championship, that is going to be a photograph. That is going to be the play that this team is going to be remembered by right now. It was just pure instinct, pure just heart, pure courage on the part of Jeremiah Love, who has been injured. And of course, I'm not trying to be a seer of all things, but he also had the 98-yard run against Indiana. And when he did that, you just knew the game was over in the very first game in the playoffs way back in December. So you just felt good about that game. This game against Penn State, it gave me butterflies. That's how exciting it was. Tonight is the worrisome moment as I'm watching this game, because I'm looking at the Buckeyes. They have an offense that, do you realize they had 2 wide receivers and 2 running backs, that if you combined all their yardage, because they were all close to 1,000 yards, indeed Jeremiah Smith, their wide receiver extraordinaire, had over 1,000 yards this year. But they had 2 running backs totaling 1,800 yards, and the second wide receiver, the bookend wide receiver, I'm going to try to pronounce his name. I'm going to try to pronounce his name the right way, and I know I'm going to foul it up, but it's the running backs are Henderson and Judkins, and it's Emeka Egbuka, and I know I'm probably mispronouncing that, but he caught and ran as a wide receiver for 947 yards. Jeremiah Smith caught and ran for 1,227 yards. So right there, you've combined for over 2,100 yards. And then Quinton Judkins and Trayvon Henderson, they combined for 1,927 yards of offense. So you have 4 players basically gaining 1,000 yards. You know, in the NFL, we made a big deal when Zonka and Morris ran for 1,000 yards each. It was unbelievable. And on top of that, Will Howard has by himself, passing and running and stuff, accounted for over 4,000 yards of offense. So this is a Buckeye team that has high octane offense. And I know that Notre Dame comes in with, at least this team, I think with the 3rd highest scoring offense in their history, which is something. But this is anecdotal. I've watched them play quite a few games, and I feel like they cannot put teams away. Now, mind you, they played 7 ranked teams. 2 of them, of course, the military academies, which they throttled. I'm not talking about them, and that's not a diss to the military academies. However, against Texas A&M, first game of the year, even though it was an upset, even though it was on the road in College Station, I just felt that Notre Dame just doesn't have, let's say, the offense to just put the hammer down and knock better teams out. And that's what concerns me. Will they, if Notre Dame gets off to, let's say, a double-digit lead, which is something that Ohio State has not faced all year, being down by a double-digit deficit. Now, they have lost twice, but they're in those games. It was a frustrating loss to Michigan, a tough loss to Oregon. They redeemed themselves by just destroying Oregon. I mean, they were up 34-0 in the Rose Bowl at one point in that game. So they avenged that earlier defeat to be here. And legitimately, Ohio State belongs here. They have the 2 losses by a combined 5 points. And what worries me with Notre Dame, do they have the horses on offense? Will they have enough defense to stop 5 guys with 8,000 yards between them? That's what worries me. And if they can get on top, and of course, that's always, you always want to be leading. I want to get a nice margin, and then hopefully Notre Dame can churn out yardage and eat up the clock. Maybe that's their success in this game, because I just don't see them coming from too far behind in winning this game. Maybe they can be down 10 points and just fight their way back. The defense has got to play like they did against Georgia. The defense has got to play like they did against Indiana. And the defense has got to play like they did against Penn State. Penn State was more of a bend down, don't break. I felt like in the Indiana game, which was not as close as the game indicated at the end. I mean, basically Notre Dame dominated that game for about 3 quarters and about 8 minutes into the fourth quarter. They allowed 2 late touchdowns to make it look good. It wasn't. If you saw the game, Notre Dame just owned Indiana in that game. I don't think that's going to happen this time, and that's what worries me. But I'm still going to go with the Irish, and I'm going to be rooting for Notre Dame. I'm going to be rooting for Marcus Freeman. I'm going to be rooting for the Golden Domers tonight against the Ohio State Buckeyes. All right, that being said, let's just talk about, as I now, even though I introduced with the cartoon on the NFC, very disappointing. I had done an earlier show on Detroit, the Lions, hopefully making the Super Bowl. You know, they haven't won since 1957. And way back when, those Lions were pretty dominating. In fact, I was talking to my brother Eddie, didn't realize this. The other time that the Lions won, or where they had some good teams, 34-35, I didn't realize this. Then I realized it. Then I didn't realize it. And then he made me remember it. Detroit that year, I think it was 35. They won with the Tigers, the Red Wings, and the Lions. Something that's unprecedented. Now, you could argue the Mets, the Knicks, and the Jets all won in 69, but not really. Well, to a certain extent, yes. But the Jets really were the 68 season, won the 69 Super Bowl. The Knicks won the 69-70 NBA championship. And, of course, the Mets in 69 won the World Series. So that's kind of cool, too. Almost like a stepping stone year. So that's basically 12 months as well. But that 35 Detroit team, or the city of Detroit, saw 3 winners. Lions, in the major sports at the time, Lions, the Red Wings, and of course the Tigers. That's why Saturday's game was so disappointing. And you got the feeling with Detroit, I thought they were ready for the game. They just made, unfortunately, a lot of mistakes. The biggest one was the Goff interception that resulted in a touchdown interception return by Washington. You can't recall the defensive back who ran it back. On that play, though, Goff, oof, man, I thought he was getting decapitated. What a block was put on him, right to the head, goes down, actually doesn't return. And the backup quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater, had to come in and really coming literally not just off the bench, but out of the coach's locker room from leading his high school team to a championship. Bridgewater did a nice job engineering what I think was, a big touchdown to get Detroit back in the game. It was frustrating for the Detroit fans because they have not seen a winner. Do you realize, and I had a cartoon earlier this year about this, I've never seen Detroit win. I'm 64 years old. Imagine that. You have to go back to 57 to see Detroit, the Lions, have a championship. And, of course, I extolled the great players that I grew up with Detroit, the Alex Karrases, the Mel Forrest, the Lem Barneys, and, of course, the Barry Sanders. And they haven't even gotten to the promised land. Made a couple of championships with Sanders, but got destroyed by Washington one year, like 41 or 45-0. So it's been kind of frustrating to be a Lion fan. Minnesota, of course, everyone was talking about the fact that here was a double-digit 14-win team. They had to go on the road to L.A., actually to Phoenix, to play a team that only won 10 games. They were 4 games better than the Rams, and they come up with a goose egg. And, of course, the Packers, frustrated, to say the least, in that game against the Eagles, losing in Philadelphia. Now, why I made such a big deal? 3 teams going down from the same division. All 3 teams with double-digit wins, and 2 of them with the Lions with the best record, and Minnesota with 14 wins. And they go down in the first round. They don't even win, well, in their first game, because technically Detroit had a bye. But to be destroyed like that, you wonder how bad maybe Chicago was, because they beat up on them twice. But if you're an NFC North fan, and of course I nearly did the cartoon. I was going to write down, I guess subconsciously, NFC Central, because that's how I always knew that league or that division. And now it's the NFC North, and that's why I said it's gone south. It was just a terrible end to a season that had such promise, especially for Detroit. In fact, I am sure many people predicted that this Super Bowl would be played between Kansas City and, of course, Detroit. And, of course, Detroit's going to have to wait another year. And why I love Detroit so much is every September when school begins, I always check when or who Detroit is playing on Thanksgiving. So it's interesting about that. All right, let's segue over to Bob Uecker. And Bob Uecker just recently passed at the age of 90. And unbelievable, age 90. And Uecker, of course, made more of a name for himself as both a broadcaster, as a movie actor, doing commercials early in his career with Miller Lite, which were funny commercials. And so my cartoon today is with Bob Uecker. And let me just read the cartoon to you. It says, Bob Uecker's here. Give him a cloud way up there, and tell him he's got a seat in the front row. Now, of course, anyone who's been a big Bob Uecker fan knows that the front row goes back to his Miller Lite beer commercials, when he said, wow, they put me in the front row, or he was sitting in a particular seat at the stadium and an usher comes over and says, hey, we got you a better seat. So he's thinking he's got box seats behind home plate, and it cuts, and there he is up in the nosebleed sections of the stadium sitting all by himself. And, he thought he was going to get a front row seat. So he had a self-deprecating type of humor. He was great for the game, known as Mr. Baseball. Apparently, Johnny Carson gave him that nickname, Mr. Baseball, stayed attached to it. Uecker would go on to be a broadcaster for the Brewers for many, many years. In fact, I was reading his Saber, or another article about Bob Uecker, and apparently George Steinbrenner, the owner of the Yankees, was flirting with the idea of bringing Uecker into New York as his broadcaster, and promising, from what I understand in this story, promising Uecker quite a bit of money, an increase in salary, and Uecker turned it down. He was very comfortable in Milwaukee, very comfortable being in the Wisconsin backwoods, I think maybe fishing and hunting, but he was at peace with the people, the fans of Milwaukee, announcing the Brewers games, etc. I remember him not as a Milwaukee Brewer broadcaster, but always working the ABC Monday night game or the playoffs or whatever. And he did a great job. Now, I wasn't the biggest Uecker fan, but when my brother Ed, we always, when we see great players that we grew up with or people that are attached to our childhood, we constantly send, hey, by the way, this fella died or this fella passed. In fact, we went back and forth today talking about the death of Jeff Torborg, who went to Rutgers, was a catcher at Rutgers, would later go on to manage the Mets, the White Sox, and I believe the Marlins. But what he was known for mostly as a catcher, much like Uecker, barely hit 200, but he caught a number of no-hitters by Sandy Koufax and won by Nolan Ryan. Now, I didn't have time to do any research on that. I know there is, I think, a catcher who actually had caught many years ago 4 no-hitters. And I think that might be the record. Nevertheless, to be able to catch 1 no-hitter is unbelievable. To catch 2 by Sandy Koufax, the quintessential lefty pitcher of the 1960s. But then to catch a 3rd one by Von Ryan Express, Nolan Ryan, pretty unbelievable. So anyway, he sent me just a funny thing about Uecker. Yeah, Mr. Baseball, but he actually had unbelievable success against Sandy Koufax. And so that got me into thinking, all right, okay, Uecker doesn't do anything one way or the other for me. I thought he was funny when I did see him. I have to be honest with you. I thought he was funny. And I guess maybe I was spoiled by, let's say, some of the guys we had here in the city or in New York. Remember, we had Rizzuto, who I thought was funny. He didn't even know he was being funny, and he was funny. We had the classy Bill White, who I always loved his broadcast. And then we had the 3, and Frank Messer for the Yankees. Then we had the 3 great broadcasters for the Mets growing up. And I'm talking about the 60s and 70s. Lindsey Nelson, who, ironically enough, would do Notre Dame, that Notre Dame tape that I'm talking about. Plus, he did the Cotton Bowl. It was, I think that and the Sun Bowl were the only games that CBS ever showed before all of the channels got into showing college football. Or put it this way, it was dominated by ABC at one point. Maybe they had a monopoly on the games. And then, of course, Bob Murphy, much like Messer, was just a professional broadcaster. I really enjoyed Murphy as an announcer. And Ralph Kiner, who was really funny, like Rizzuto, I don't think realized how funny he was. And probably like Uecker, because I never heard him actually do a broadcast for the Brewers. But I'm sure he probably included many of his own war stories and locker room tales. Kiner was phenomenal with his baseball history and also great stories. When he played for the Pirates and he played for the Cubs, and of course, all these other players and coaches and managers that he met. Plus, here's the other thing with those 60 teams and even the Yankee teams, although you hear it more. Once the Met broadcasters mentioned Casey, all I know is this. If I was watching the game with my brothers or my father, they immediately just started laughing because Casey was Casey. That's all I got to say. But anyway, now my brothers got me going into a deep dive. And I spent quite a bit of time doing this. I probably made a number of mistakes on this. So this is going to be not perfect. He had 146 hits. Ready for this? I was looking at some of the players that Uecker had hits off. Now, he had some off regular players, but I'm going to tell you this. His first professional hit was off Art Mahaffey in 1962. And Mahaffey that year won 19 games for the Phillies. He had hits off Jim Maloney, who threw a no-hitter and lost a no-hitter. He had a number of hits off Ken Holtzman. Now, that's kind of hard because he was ending his career when Holtzman was just coming in. And he had 146 hits in his whole career, spaced out from 62 to 67. All right. He had 3 hits off Holtzman when he was with the Chicago Cubs. And Holtzman, as I have talked about, I think he was a phenomenal pitcher. And actually, bringing this back, Holtzman was actually the last pitcher to beat Sandy Koufax in the regular season. It was the last regular season loss of Koufax's career in 1966. Ken Holtzman beat him late in the year. So you're talking about a decent pitcher, a guy who won 17 games for the Cubbies, also threw a no-hitter against the Reds, and then would help the A's win 3 championships. Here's another guy. He had hits off 2 Jacksons. Larry Jackson, who won 20 games for the Cardinals. And I remember this, Al Jackson of the Mets. But the other letter J pitcher that he had was Fergie Jenkins. And in fact, Fergie Jenkins pitching for the Philadelphia Phillies was one of Uecker's home run victims. Uecker had 13 home runs total. He had home runs against Hall of Famer Jenkins. He had a home run against Sandy Koufax. He had a home run against Hall of Famer Gaylord Perry, right? So whatever he did, or whatever things they were doing, all I can think of as I was compiling this, and I noticed some of the good pitchers that he had his best games from. And believe me, Uecker had few and far between great games. But number of them won 20 games or 18 or 17. And yes, you can say, well, they were getting 40 starts a year and all the rest of it. Still, to win 18 games, I would say this. You're having a really good season if you win 15 and 16. You're having a very good season if you're winning 17. I think you're having a unbelievable season if you're winning 18 and 19. And then if you hit 20, anything over 20 is a fantastic year. And if you can get to 25, I mean, that's an all-time season, regardless of how many starts, regardless of, quote-unquote, what your ERA might be. To win 25 games, you got to be doing something right on the mound. And those were the kind of guys. Ready for this? He had 3 hits against Ray Sadecki. He had 3 hits against Kurt Simmons. He owned Warren Spahn. He had 2 hits in a game against Spahn. Ready for this? In a game against Spahn early in his career. And this is when Spahn was, I believe, pitching for Milwaukee in 64. He was 2 for 3. He was 2 for 3 with 2 runs scored. Now, listen, here's why I'm bringing this up. Uecker admits that he was a terrible hitter. I think he only hit 200 for his career. He only had 13 home runs, 146 total. And yet, here he is getting home runs off Gaylord Perry, getting home runs off Ferguson Jenkins, hitting a home run off Sandy Koufax, getting a couple of hits off Warren Spahn. The guys who he really owned was a guy by the name of Dick Ellsworth, who he had 9 hits off, who actually, I think, won 20 games for the Cubbies. And the other guy that he absolutely owned, I was looking at this, was poor Bob Veal of the Pirates. He had 8 hits off Bob Veal. Now, and I'm going to throw in Jim O'Toole. Actually, Bob Uecker had 3 hits off him. When I was going down the list of teams, Uecker had his most hits of 20 or more against the following teams: Cincinnati, Chicago. He actually had 20 hits off Chicago, 23. He had 19 against Pittsburgh. Against Los Angeles, he had 17 hits. And the New York Mets, remember, they just were in their infancy during his early years. He had 15 hits. He actually had 2 hits against Carlton. I mean, I was amazed. Look, again, 146 hits, 13 home runs, and you're saying, okay, he's got to get a majority of them against guys of inferior talent who probably would just surface and then leave and all the rest of it. I'm talking Hall of Famers. Ernie Broglio, and also meaningful guys in history. Ernie Broglio, probably the most lopsided trade, or one of the most lopsided trades in Cardinal history, when he was traded to the Cubbies, and the Cubbies got back Lou Brock, which helped ignite their 64 team, of which I do believe he was a member. Let me just get that real quick. I'm pretty sure either he was a member of that 64 team or the 67 team. In 64, I know he started with Milwaukee. So in 64, no, he was traded. So he did play for the 64 championship St. Louis Cardinals, and then would get traded and would play with Philadelphia a number of years, and then end his career back with the Braves franchise. And it was with Philadelphia that he got a couple of hits against Carlton and the Cardinals. The guy who he really owned with the Dodgers was Claude Austin. He had 5 hits, and he seemed to have hit him so hard in some cases. It was just unbelievable. Overall, Chris Short hit 4 straight hits against when he was playing games. In all, I was just doing this as a fun thing as the final. Even though he hit 200, I was just having some fun with his batting average of when he got hits in a game. Now, obviously, if you go 1 for 3, it's 333. You go 1 for 4. Now you combine that with 1 for 3, you're hitting 286. You go another 1 for 4. You got 3 hits in 11 at bats. You're hitting 273. All right. He had some moments in his career where he was on fire for a couple of weeks in his season. Probably that's true with most players. They get hot for a couple of weeks and then they fizzle or go back to who they are. But in the games that he had hits in, ready for this, he hit 405. Bob Uecker hit 405 in the one with the 146 hits that he got. And it was very rare. Uecker, I don't believe, he only had one game, I think, where he had, or 2 games where he had 3 hits. And I think that was against Cincinnati and Mel McQueen. And, of course, the Phillies, who I mentioned, Chris Short. He had 3 hits, all singles, against Chris Short. But Uecker, maybe he never gave me a laugh in the broadcast booth. Maybe he never gave me a laugh because I never saw him on the field. But in the statistics, courtesy of Baseball Reference, Uecker leaves me laughing with his success against Hall of Fame pitchers. This is Will O'Toole for Park Ridge Sports History. Thank you again for joining us. See you soon.